What is up, everyone? It is me, Retrovin, and we're back with another review, and this time we're going in hard. And I mean it, because we're going to be reviewing the entire Spyro trilogy, starting with Spyro 1. Now, they're going to be separate reviews, of course, because, you know, they're not super long games, but they're long enough games to have separate reviews. If Crash has separate reviews, Spyro gets it too. Without further ado, though, let's start with the first game. So Spyro starts off in the world of dragons, and basically what happens is the dragons are doing an interview, and basically during the interview they're talking about how they're epic. They don't actually explain why they're doing the interview, but during the interview they actually inadvertently insult a certain villain named Nasty Nork. And just one thing before I mention why they insulted Nasty Nork, I have to give them credit for making it make sense, because in the original game, Nasty Nork is just standing there in the air. He's not looking at a TV, but in the Reignited trilogy, they do make him look at a TV, so it actually makes sense, because it's like an actual interview. But yeah, they call the guy ugly, pretty uncalled for, to be honest, which inadvertently upsets him and makes him turn all the dragons into stone. They kind of got what was coming, because that was a pretty bitch move, but, you know, my opinions aside, Spyro has to go and save them, and that's where your whole adventure begins. Now, I will say this, I could explain the rest of the story, but there's not really much to explain, so I'm not even going to really show any cutscenes, because honestly, there's not much you're missing. Basically, Spyro goes through the worlds, he does his thing, he saves all the dragons, and then Nasty Nork's like, well, then you fight Nasty Nork, and I'll mention, like, what's really wrong with that boss, too, because it's kind of similar to another boss from a certain other review. But yeah, basically, after Spyro defeats Nasty Nork, he does it. He's got his cool glasses on, he's like, yeah, I got Nasty Nork defeated. And if you defeat Nasty Nork, you unlock a very mythical place, only known as Nasty's Loot. And basically in Nasty's Loot, you have to chase down these thieves until you can get them all dead. And once you do that, you actually can end up in Nasty Nork's room, the room that he was yelling at the dragons about, which I thought was a cool little thing, because I haven't really played the original, so I don't know. Like, well, I played it, but I haven't beat it, so I don't really know much about how it happens, but it's really cool that, like, the main treasure room, at least in this version, just so happens to be the room that Nasty Nork was in at the beginning, because that's, like, his main room, that's his pad, so it really feels like we're breaking into Nasty Nork's place, you know, and fucking shit up. Well, now that we got all the main story stuff out of the way, I guess we should talk about Spyro's moves. So basically, you have your basic Spyro moves. You have your jump, you have your little glide, you have your flame. Yeah, you have all the cool stuff, but most importantly, probably one of the best moves. You have the charge move, which is a very big Spyro staple. Another thing they have is the roll. In the original version, they didn't bring this back in the sequels, so it was a really helpful move when having to dodge enemies. I guess I shouldn't say really helpful, but it was fairly helpful. Like, it's not something I use all the time, but if I really need it, it's really good for a pinch, I will tell you that. The enemies, as you can see right here, are very vibrant looking. Like, if there's one thing you can give Spyro 1 credit for, is that they have a very nice enemy variety. I like that in my games, and even though they're all basically like a different type of Nork, every enemy kind of feels creative and different in their own way. Like, you have these little, I guess they're like moms or whatever. Like they're the mothers of these like little tiki men, and sometimes it won't just be them stirring a pot. They'll actually be throwing their young at you, which, I mean, pretty fucked up, but they do it anyways. Another thing you'll encounter are flight levels. So these levels are basically, they're very timed levels that you have to make sure to do within a certain amount of time. After you beat them, you're not really timed, and you're just free to, I would say, break your high score that you got when you first did it, or, you know, for the last one you did. These sections are actually really cool. When I first played this game, I didn't really like them, but, you know, coming back to it in the future, and when I recently Let's Played it, I really like these levels. These are fun levels, because it's all about endurance. You have to find a good strategy, you have to take out those things the best way you possibly can, and these levels are honestly some of the funnest levels in the game. I love doing these. I just wanted to mention this because I would have felt really fucked up if I didn't, you know, mention one of the greatest sections in this game. Also, let me just say the loading screens are really cool because in the original, you have these loading screens where you basically like were floating in the air. But not only that, you can even do flips and you can do the flame, which was something you couldn't do in the original. It was a nice little thing they added to the game that I enjoyed. Each environment in this game is very creative and varied. It's kind of hard to give an exact feel, but I'd say if Spyro 1 specifically, because each Spyro game has their own sort of feel in terms of environment. So Spyro 1, I'd say has kind of a more medieval feel, like a very fairy tale-esque feel, because you have dragons, you have all these mythical creatures. It's a really cool sort of theme, and a lot of the levels are themed around that. Like, you have a floating island, kind of similar to Skylanders. You have little mushroom people. You got these guys floating on balloons, Norks, which are probably, like, a parody of orcs, which, you know, is what I'd guess it is. And it's really nice. One complaint I do have about the game, though, and this is kind of a petty one, it doesn't feel like a game that really needs a live system, but it has it anyways, because, like, if you look at games like Jak and Daxter, and, you know, even Insomniac's next game, Ratchet and Clank, it doesn't really have lives, and it feels like Spyro is probably clinging on to the old feel of lives, because, like, I'd understand Crash Bandicoot, because Crash Bandicoot is more of a linear type game. It feels like a game that requires lives. Spyro doesn't really need that. He kind of would do well without that sort of system. Not that that's a big deal, because, you know, it's very easy to get lives in the game, but just a thing I'd note. Now, I have to really say this, and this isn't a controversial view by any stretch of the imagination, the boss battles in Spyro 1 are garbage. And that's probably the worst part of this game, is that they didn't seem to really do well with them. Because, like, every boss either feels like some chase thing or... I mean, that's really what it is. You chase a boss down, they shoot a couple of attacks, you hit them, and then they run away. Even the final boss, it's very reminiscent of Crash 2, where you're chasing Cortex. Like, in this boss, for example, that I'm showing, I'm having to chase down a thief. That's not a boss, you're not fighting the guy. They really dropped the ball with the boss battles. I know it doesn't ruin the whole game, but, like, I like my good boss battles, and that's really what helps with the game. So, I just wish the bosses were better. When I say all the bosses are bad, I mean all of them were bad. None of them were very good or memorable at all. Yeah. I guess now that we're done talking about the boss, we can get on with the music. And I will say the music is really good. One of the strong suits of the game, aside from everything else that's a strong suit that I mentioned. It's very nice, and I'd love to show some of them off. Anyways, though, that was my review of Spyro the Dragon. This game is a very nice game. It's very good for a beginning to a series. I wouldn't say it's like the greatest thing I've ever played, but honestly, it's a very solid experience for what it has, because it was the first in the Spyro series, and it was really nice, like, as a collectathon. It was probably one of the first big ones, aside from something like Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, and you know, it's so remembered that it got a remake like this, so that just goes to show how good of a game it is. Now, the real question is, how will the sequels fare when we get to that game in the next couple of days? I guess you'll have to find out! Anyways, guys, see you in my next review, and I'm out. Peace.